Prenuptial agreement. I had my lawyer draft a template 6 months ago when I first considered this approach. Never found anyone worth using it on. Until tonight. Marcus opened the envelope with hands that didn't quite feel like his own. Inside, 20 pages of legal language, but the terms were straightforward. Separate finances, no claim to her company or assets. Provisions for Sophie's education and healthcare. Dissolution terms if either party wanted out after 2 years. It was the most romantic yet unromantic thing he'd ever seen. You've been planning this. Not a question. I'm a CEO. I plan everything. Elena's expression softened fractionally. But I've been alone for 4 years, Marcus. Since Bradford, my ex, ended things. I'm tired of being alone. Tired of my parents setting me up with men who see dollar signs instead of a person. Tired of feeling like I'm incomplete because my body won't cooperate with societal expectations. She met his eyes directly. And I think you're tired too. Tired of rejection. Tired of doing everything alone. Tired of your daughter asking for something you can't give her. Marcus's throat closed. This morning, before he'd made Sophie's favorite chocolate chip pancakes, before he'd driven her to school and promised tonight's date would go well, she'd asked him one simple question. Daddy, why don't I have a mommy like the other kids? He hadn't known how to answer, still didn't. This is insane, he said, but the words lacked conviction. Elena signaled the waiter again. Let's eat, get to know each other. You can give us your answer after dessert. They ordered. Elena asked about Sophie, what she liked, what she struggled with, what made her laugh. Marcus found himself talking more than he had in months, maybe years, about Sophie's talent for drawing, how she could lose herself for hours with just paper and colored pencils. About the time she'd tried to give their neighbor's dog a bath and flooded the backyard. About parent-teacher conferences where he sat alone among couples and felt like an imposter. Elena listened with focused intensity, asking follow-up questions that showed she was actually processing the information rather than just being polite. She didn't look at her phone once. When Marcus asked about her company, Elena's eyes lit up in a way they hadn't before. She explained how she'd identified a gap in the market for mid-sized banks that couldn't afford enterprise-level security but needed better protection than off-the-shelf solutions. How she'd taught herself to code at night while working a day job as a junior analyst. How the first 3 years had been brutal, sleeping 4 hours a night, living on ramen, maxing out credit cards to make payroll. My parents told me I was throwing my life away. My father said I should have gone to law school like he wanted. My mother said no man would want a woman who works 70-hour weeks. Elena's expression hardened. They cut me off financially when I refused to quit. Said I needed to learn about consequences. Did you? I learned that I'm better off without their money, and that the people who love you shouldn't put conditions on that love. She paused. Which is why I haven't spoken to them in 3 years. Not since they made it clear I was a disappointment for not being married with children by 35. The waiter cleared their plates, brought dessert, creme brulee that neither of them touched. Lena pulled out her phone, set it on the table between them. Put your number in, let me meet Sophie. Let's see if this insane idea could actually work. Marcus's hands trembled as he picked up the phone. This was crazy. Absolute madness. You didn't marry strangers because you were both lonely. That's not how functional relationships worked. But then again, traditional dating wasn't working either. 12 failures in 2 years. How many more rejections before he gave up entirely? Before Sophie stopped asking about why she didn't have a mother? Before he turned into one of those bitter single parents who'd convinced themselves they were better off alone? He typed in his number, handed the phone back. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. Relief, maybe. Or hope. I mean it. I want to meet Sophie. I want to see if we can build something real out of this practical arrangement. Why are you doing this? Marcus asked one more time, needing to understand. Really? Elena stood, gathering her bag and coat. She looked down at him, and for just a moment, the CEO mask slipped entirely. Underneath was raw vulnerability, the kind that comes from too many nights spent alone in empty apartments. Because I'm tired of being alone, and because when I heard you talk about your daughter this evening, the love in your voice, the pride, I thought, That's what family sounds like. That's what I want. She left cash on the table to cover both meals. More than enough. Then she walked toward the exit, pausing just before the door. Think about it, Marcus. But don't take too long. Loneliness has a way of making us settle for less than we deserve. Then she was gone, disappearing into the Christmas lights and winter darkness. Marcus sat alone at the table, staring at the text message that had already appeared on his phone. This is Elena. Call me when you're ready. For the first time in 6 years, he felt something other than resignation. Something dangerous and terrifying and impossible to ignore. Hope. 3 days passed. Marcus didn't call. Monday morning began at 5:30, same as always. He made breakfast for Sophie, scrambled eggs, toast with too much butter, the way she liked it, orange juice in her favorite cup with the faded Disney princess. Packed her lunch while she ate, making sure to include the string cheese she'd begged for and the apple slices he knew she'd trade away. Drove her to Somerville Elementary by 7:15, watched her run toward the building with her backpack bouncing, purple coat bright against the gray morning. Then the real day started. 45 minutes on the Red Line to downtown crossing, packed shoulder to shoulders with commuters who avoided eye contact. Up to the offices of Morrison and Associates on the 14th floor of a building that had been modern in 1985 and hadn't updated since. His desk was in a cluster of 5 cubicles, gray fabric walls that absorbed sound and hope in equal measure. Spreadsheets, always spreadsheets. Today it was the preliminary audit for Newton Energy, a mid-sized company in Waltham that wanted to go public in 18 months. Marcus's job was finding the problems before the SEC did, tracking every expense, every asset, every liability, looking for patterns that didn't fit, numbers that were too clean, transactions that happened at convenient times. He was good at it, had a knack for seeing what other accountants missed. But it was also mind-numbing work, hour after hour of comparing figures, building models, testing assumptions. The kind of work that let your mind wander if you weren't careful. Marcus's mind wandered to Elena. He'd been thinking about her constantly for 3 days. The proposal, the prenup, the complete insanity of what she'd suggested. Marriage to a stranger because they were both lonely and could solve each other's problems. It sounded like the premise of a bad romantic comedy, not real life. Except Elena hadn't seemed like someone who dealt in fantasies. She'd been direct, practical, almost clinical in her assessment of their situation. No promises of love or passion, just a partnership that might possibly become something more. Marcus pulled up his personal spreadsheet during lunch, the one he kept in a password-protected file where he tracked every dollar of his life. The numbers told their own brutal story. Monthly income after taxes, $4,200. Rent, $2,400. After-school care for Sophie, $800. Utilities, $200. Car payment and insurance, $300. Groceries, $600. Everything else, clothes, entertainment, unexpected expenses, whatever was left. He was saving roughly $400 a month. At that rate, he'd have enough for a down payment on a modest house in 17 years. Sophie would be graduated from college by then, assuming he could afford to send her to college at all. His current savings, $12,000, would cover maybe 1 semester at UMass, 2 if she lived at home. The partner track Ted Morrison kept dangling would help. Senior accountant made $90,000 base, plus bonuses. But partner track also meant 60-hour weeks, weekend work, constant travel. How was he supposed to do that while raising Sophie alone? His phone buzzed. Text from Rachel. Did you call her? Marcus deleted the message without responding. His sister had been hounding him since Christmas, wanting details about the mystery woman he'd mentioned in passing. He hadn't told her about Elena's proposal. Couldn't, because saying it out loud would make it real, and then he'd have to actually decide whether he was desperate enough or crazy enough to consider it. The afternoon dragged. At 5:30, Marcus packed up and headed back to Somerville, picking Sophie up from extended care at 6. She climbed into the back seat, chattering about her day. They'd learned about the solar system in science. She'd traded her apple slices for cookies at lunch. Her friend Emma had invited her to a birthday party next month at some place called Pump It Up. Marcus drove on autopilot, making appropriate noises at appropriate times, while Sophie's voice washed over him. She was happy, healthy, well-adjusted, according to her teacher. But she was also 7, and 7-year-olds couldn't see what was missing from their lives until they compared themselves to others. How long before Sophie realized that everyone else had 2 parents? How long before she started to resent him for not giving her that? Home by 6:30, dinner was spaghetti with sauce from a jar, salad from a bag, garlic bread from the freezer. They ate at the small kitchen table while Sophie told him about a book her teacher had read, something about a girl who could talk to animals. Marcus listened with half his attention, the other half running calculations. If he married Elena, Sophie would have a mother figure. Stability, maybe even private school if Elena's company was as successful as she'd claimed. College would be covered. Sophie would grow up with opportunities Marcus could never provide alone. But at what cost? Marrying someone he didn't know, didn't love, might never love. Living a lie. Teaching Sophie that relationships were transactions rather than connections. After dinner, Sophie worked on homework at the kitchen table while Marcus cleaned up. Then bath time, story time, tucking her into bed with the stuffed rabbit that had been her security blanket since she was 2. He sat on the edge of her mattress, brushing hair back from her forehead. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice was small in the darkness. "Yeah, sweetheart? Do you think Santa could bring me a mommy for next Christmas?" Marcus's chest tightened. "I don't think Santa works that way, kiddo." "Why not? Emma got a new mommy. Her daddy got married last year." "That's different. Emma's dad, he met someone. Can't you meet someone?" Sophie looked up at him with Jennifer's eyes, dark, direct, seeing more than a 7-year-old should. "You go on dates sometimes." "I do. It just hasn't worked out yet." "Is it because of me?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "Do the ladies not like you because you have me?" Every parent fears the moment when their child's perception becomes too sharp, when innocence gives way to understanding. This was that moment. Marcus could lie, could reassure her that wasn't true, but Sophie was smart enough to know he'd be lying. Some people aren't ready for kids. That's about them, not you. "But if I wasn't here, you could find someone." "Hey," Marcus cupped her face gently, "don't ever think that. You're the best thing in my life. Anyone who can't see how amazing you are doesn't deserve to be in our family." Sophie nodded, but her expression suggested she didn't quite believe him. She burrowed under her covers, turning toward the wall. "Night, Daddy." "Good night, sweetheart. I love you." "Love you too." Marcus retreated to the living room, sank onto the couch that had come with the rental, pulled out his phone. Elena's message stared back at him from 3 days ago. He almost called, finger hovering over the contact. Then he closed the phone and picked up the television remote instead. Tuesday was worse. Sophie woke up with a fever, 101 degrees, cheeks flushed, complaining of a sore throat. Marcus called in sick to work, something he could only do 3 times a year without using vacation days he was saving for Sophie's spring break. Spent the day monitoring her temperature, feeding her popsicles, letting her watch more television than he usually allowed. By afternoon, she'd fallen asleep on the couch, and Marcus sat in the kitchen reviewing his personal finances again. Ran projections. If he got promoted to senior accountant, maxed out his 401k contributions, kept expenses exactly where they were, Sophie might graduate from college with $20,000 in student loans. Manageable but not ideal. If he married Elena, Sophie would graduate debt-free. More than that, she'd have access to opportunities Marcus couldn't even imagine. Art classes at the Museum of Fine Arts, summer camps that cost thousands, a college fund that would cover Harvard if she wanted it. All it would pound was his pride, his independence, his belief that he could do this alone. His phone rang. Rachel. "You've been avoiding me," his sister said without preamble. "Sophie's sick. I've been busy." "Bullshit. What happened with the mystery woman?" Rachel had the persistence of a good trial attorney, which she was. 46 years old, divorced 2 years ago after her husband decided he preferred his paralegal. She'd rebuilt her life and now spent her free time trying to fix Marcus's. Nothing happened. It was just a strange conversation. "Strange how?" Marcus hesitated. Rachel was his closest confidant, had been since they were kids growing up in Quincy, sharing a bedroom because their parents couldn't afford anything bigger. She'd loaned him money when Jennifer got sick and the medical bills piled up. She'd sat with him at the funeral when he couldn't stop crying. She'd held Sophie while he fell apart. If anyone would understand, it would be Rachel. She asked me to marry her. Silence on the line. Then, "I'm sorry, what?" Marcus explained. The whole surreal encounter, Elena's proposal, the prenup, her reasons. When he finished, Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "Are you considering it?" "I don't know. It's insane. It's practical." Rachel's lawyer brain kicked in. "Honestly, Marcus, it's not that different from how wealthy families used to arrange marriages. Strategic alliances, mutual benefit. That was centuries ago. Please, it still happens in some circles. And this woman, Elena, she's being honest about what she wants. No pretense of love. No false expectations. Just two people helping each other out." What about Sophie? What about her? She'd gain a mother figure, financial security, opportunities you can't provide. Seems like she'd benefit most. Marcus rubbed his eyes. "And what do I tell her? That daddy married a stranger because it made economic sense? You tell her you found someone who cares about both of you, who wants to be part of your family." Rachel's voice softened. "Marcus, you're a great father, but you're also exhausted. I can hear it in your voice. How long can you keep this up? Working full-time, raising Sophie alone, trying to date? Something has to give. So I should just marry this woman. I'm saying you should at least meet her again. Let her meet Sophie. See if there's potential for something real. You might be surprised." After they hung up, Marcus sat in the quiet house, listening to Sophie's congested breathing from the living room. Rachel had a point. He was exhausted. Bone-deep, soul-level tired in a way that no amount of sleep could fix. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying everything alone for too long. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe this insane idea could actually work. Wednesday evening, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus called. Elena answered on the second ring. "You're overthinking this." Despite everything, Marcus almost laughed. "How do you know?" "Because I've been doing the same thing. I almost deleted your number twice." A pause. "I'm scared too, Marcus. This isn't easy for me either. I have a daughter. She's been through enough losing her mother. I can't bring someone into her life unless I'm sure." "You'll never be sure. That's not how life works. But staying alone because you're afraid of failure? That's not protecting Sophie. That's protecting yourself." The words stung because they were true. Marcus had been telling himself he was keeping Sophie safe by avoiding relationships. But really he was avoiding the possibility of rejection, of loss, of having to grieve again. Saturday, he heard himself say, "There's a park near my house. Lexington Common, 10 in the morning. I'll be there." Marcus hung up and sat in the darkness of his bedroom, wondering if he'd just made the best decision of his life or the worst. Saturday arrived too fast. Marcus made Sophie's favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes, the recipe Jennifer had taught him in their first apartment, back when they were young and broke and stupidly happy. He'd perfected them over 6 years of practice. Crispy edges, fluffy center, chocolate melted just right. Sophie ate 3, getting syrup on her chin, chattering about the new art supplies her teacher had given her. Real colored pencils, not the cheap ones. Marcus watched her, memorizing the moment. Whatever happened today, their life was about to change. "We're meeting someone at the park," he said, trying to sound casual. "A friend of mine." Sophie looked up, suspicious. At 7, she'd already learned that adults rarely told the whole truth. "What kind of friend?" "Her name is Elena. She's someone I met recently. She wants to meet you." "Is she your girlfriend?" "No." Then, because honesty mattered, "Not exactly. She's just someone I'm getting to know." Sophie processed this, syrup dripping from her fork. "Okay, can I bring my sketchbook?" "Of course." They drove to Lexington Common, the park where Marcus brought Sophie most weekends when the weather cooperated. 20 minutes from home, big enough to run around, with a pond that attracted ducks year-round. Sophie loved the ducks, bought stale bread with her allowance to feed them even though the sign said not to. Elena was already there, sitting on a bench near the pond. But she'd transformed. Gone was the severe suit and corporate armor. Instead, jeans that looked expensive but casual, a navy sweater, winter boots. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders in waves. Less CEO, more human. She stood as they approached, and Marcus saw genuine nervousness in her expression. Good, at least he wasn't the only one terrified. Elena, this is Sophie. Sophie, this is Elena. Sophie studied Elena with the brutal honesty of children. Hi, you're pretty. Elena smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way it hadn't at the restaurant. Thank you, you're pretty too. I love your coat. It's purple, that's my favorite color. Sophie held up the bag of bread. I'm going to feed the ducks. Do you want to come? I'd love to. They walked toward the pond, Sophie running ahead while Marcus and Elena followed at a distance. The December air was cold but not brutal, temperature hovering around 30 degrees. Marcus shoved his hands in his pockets, hyper-aware of Elena beside him. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. Thank you for calling. Elena watched Sophie scatter breadcrumbs, her expression unreadable. She looks like you. She has her mother's eyes. I know. Elena glanced at him. I mean, I assumed. You mentioned your wife was, I'm sorry. That must have been awful. It was, still is sometimes. Marcus surprised himself with the honesty. I loved Jennifer. We were high school sweethearts, got married young, had Sophie right away. When she got sick, it felt like the universe was punishing me for being too happy. Elena was quiet for a moment. My mother died when I was 12. Car accident. I spent years angry at the universe too. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago, but her voice carried old pain. My father remarried 4 years later. I hated my stepmother at first, thought she was trying to replace my mom, but Catherine was patient. Eventually I realized she wasn't replacing anyone. She was just adding something new. Marcus understood the implication. Is that what you think you'd be doing? With Sophie? I don't know what I'd be doing. I've never been a mother, never been around children much. Elena's vulnerability showed through. I'm terrified I'll mess this up, that Sophie will hate me, that I'll prove my ex-fiancé right, that I'm incomplete. You're not incomplete. Try telling my parents that. Bitterness crept into her tone. Actually, don't. They'll probably agree with Bradford. Sophie ran back, eyes bright. There's a really fat duck. Come see. She grabbed Elena's hand without hesitation, pulling her toward the water. Elena let herself be led, glancing back at Marcus with an expression that might have been panic or might have been joy. Marcus followed, watching his daughter and this stranger who wanted to be part of their lives. The duck was indeed fat, puffed up against the cold. Sophie named him Duke because he's fancy, and insisted on giving him extra bread. Elena laughed at something Sophie said, and the sound was genuine, unforced. Not the practiced laugh of someone trying to win over a child, but real amusement. They stayed at the park for 2 hours. Sophie showed Elena her sketchbook, the drawings she'd been working on, animals mostly, with some portraits of Marcus that were surprisingly accurate. Elena praised her technique, asked questions that showed she was actually looking at the art, not just being polite. When Sophie asked if Elena could draw, Elena admitted she was terrible at it. Sophie immediately offered to teach her. They sat on a bench, Sophie explaining principles of shading and perspective that seemed advanced for a second grader, while Marcus stood nearby and watched his life potentially transform. Finally, Sophie got cold. Can we go home? My fingers are freezing. Of course, Marcus turned to Elena. Do you want to? He stopped. Inviting her to their house felt like crossing a line. Come over, Elena finished. If that's okay with Sophie. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. You can see my room. I have 100 drawings on my wall. Probably closer to 50, Marcus corrected, but he was smiling. Okay, follow us. The drive back to Somerville felt surreal. Marcus kept glancing in the rearview mirror, seeing Elena's Tesla behind his decade-old Honda Civic. The contrast couldn't be more stark. His life versus hers, poverty versus wealth. But she'd chosen to follow him anyway. His rental house looked shabbier than usual through Elena's eyes. One-story ranch, gray siding that needed repainting, a small front yard with grass he kept neatly trimmed but couldn't make lush. Inside, furniture he'd bought used on Craigslist, carpet worn in high-traffic areas, walls decorated with Sophie's artwork because he couldn't afford anything else. Elena stepped inside and didn't flinch. Just looked around with genuine interest, studying the photos on the mantel. Sophie at various ages, a few of Jennifer and Marcus from before, back when they'd been young and in love. She was beautiful, Elena said softly, looking at a wedding photo. Marcus's throat tightened. Yeah, she was. Sophie grabbed Elena's hand again. Come see my room. The house was small enough that Sophie's room was visible from the living room, a converted office barely big enough for a twin bed and dresser. But Sophie had made it her kingdom. Drawings covered every surface. On the walls, the dresser, taped to the closet door. A rainbow explosion of color and creativity. Elena stood in the doorway, taking it all in. Wow. I like to draw, Sophie said proudly. I can see that. These are incredible, Sophie. You have real talent. My teacher says I should take art classes, but Daddy says they're expensive. Marcus winced. He'd explained that private art instruction cost money they didn't have, but Sophie had apparently internalized it as him not thinking she was worth the investment. Elena knelt down to Sophie's eye level. Have you ever tried watercolors? No, are they fun? They can be. They're also tricky, but I bet you'd be amazing at them. Elena glanced up at Marcus. My stepmother teaches watercolor classes at the Museum of Fine Arts. For kids. If you're interested, I could ask about enrollment. Elena, we can't, Marcus started. I'm not offering to pay, just offering to ask about it. Whether you enroll is up to you. The careful phrasing, not imposing, just providing information. Marcus found himself nodding. They stayed for an hour. Elena sat on Sophie's floor, letting a 7-year-old teach her how to draw. Her rabbit looked more like a deformed potato, which made Sophie laugh until she couldn't breathe. Marcus stood in the doorway watching, feeling something crack open in his chest. When Elena finally said she needed to leave, Sophie hugged her. Not a quick, polite hug. A real one, arms wrapped tight, head against Elena's stomach. Can you come back? Sophie asked. Elena looked at Marcus, a question in her eyes. He nodded. If your dad says it's okay, I'd love to come back. Daddy, can she? Yes, sweetheart, she can come back. After Elena left, after Sophie went to bed still talking excitedly about her new friend who couldn't draw, Marcus sat alone in the living room. His phone buzzed. Text from Elena. Thank you for today. Sophie is wonderful. You're doing an amazing job raising her. Marcus stared at the message for a long time before responding. Thank you for coming. She really liked you. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, and appeared again. Finally, I really liked her too, and you. Would it be okay if I came back next Saturday? Yes, that would be okay. Good. See you then. Marcus set down his phone and let himself feel it, the dangerous, terrifying thing he had been trying to avoid. Hope that this insane idea might actually work, that Elena might become part of their lives, that Sophie might finally have what she'd been asking for, that Marcus might not have to do this alone anymore. The next 8 Saturdays established a pattern. Elena arrived at 10, dressed in jeans and sweaters, her CEO armor left at home. Sometimes they went to parks, other times museums. Once to the New England Aquarium, where Sophie pressed her face against the glass and named all the fish while Elena stood beside her, listening with genuine interest. Marcus watched them grow comfortable with each other. Watched Sophie's initial shyness transform into easy affection. Watched Elena stop asking permission before making suggestions, start offering opinions about Sophie's drawings, begin to understand the rhythm of their small family. It wasn't romantic, not really. More like practice, rehearsal for the roles they might play. But small moments accumulated into something larger. Elena's laugh when Sophie told terrible knock-knock jokes. The way she crouched down to Sophie's eye level when talking to her, giving her full attention. How she remembered Sophie's favorite color, her favorite food, the names of her classroom friends. One Saturday in late February, they attempted to bake cookies. Elena admitted she'd never baked anything in her life. Her family had always had a chef. Marcus walked her through the recipe Jennifer used to make, the one printed on the back of the chocolate chip bag. They measured ingredients wrong, forgot to set a timer, ended up with cookies that were charred on the edges and raw in the middle. Sophie thought it was hilarious. Elena laughed until she cried. Marcus ordered pizza and felt something shift in his chest, some wall he'd built crumbling. Another Saturday, they went ice skating at Boston Commons Frog Pond. Elena couldn't skate, kept falling, clutching the wall like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Sophie and Marcus each took one of her hands, pulling her around the rink while she wobbled and laughed and swore she was going to break something. When Elena finally managed 3 consecutive strides without falling, Sophie cheered like Elena had won the Olympics. Elena's smile, pure joy, unguarded, made Marcus's heart skip. After, when Sophie ran ahead to the hot chocolate stand, Elena turned to Marcus. Thank you. For what? For this. For letting me be part of it. Her gloved hand brushed his. I haven't been this happy in, I can't remember how long. Marcus looked at her, really looked, saw past the CEO, past the carefully constructed competence, to the lonely woman underneath who just wanted to belong somewhere. Me either, he admitted. Their hands stayed touching, just fingers through winter gloves, barely any contact at all, but it felt like a promise. The evening Sophie got sick changed everything. A Tuesday in early March.